start in a couple minutes. What I was saying, I wasn't live streaming, so I wasn't saying it, is hopefully you guys got a chance to look over that reading that I posted yesterday. And we're just going to talk a little bit about that here. Right? I'll give it another couple minutes so people, if they're still logging on. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. I'll just give you some context. So if you've been doing the social studies, we've been watching videos on early colonial life. And some of the videos talked about the northern colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies of the mid-Atlantic. So when our country first started, there were 13 colonies going from, I think, Maine down to Georgia. What this talks about, I'm going to back up a little bit, and this reading talks about, and I don't know if I mentioned this in class, but this article talks about the land bridge. Really what the land bridge was Alaska and Russia at one point were connected, and people came all the way through that land bridge from Russia to Alaska. They settled in both North and South America, and you'll hear that referred to as the Americas. So it can be anywhere from, Canada all the way down to Argentina and Chile. That would be considered the Americas. And we've broken it down to North and South America and Central America. So it's basically all that land is considered the Americas. Okay. And this reading talks about that a little bit. And then it talks a little about Christopher Columbus, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. He was trying to find India, and he stumbled into the West Indies. And then the people that he ran into, we consider them Native Americans. He thought they were Native Indians, so he called them Indians. Okay, that's where the term came from. And basically what happened is when two cultures kind of collide, they start to share things. And what's going to be important on the test is on the bottom of the first page, there's called the Columbia Exchange. And that talks about things that were exchanged between the people of Europe and the people of the Americas. And that chart breaks down staples, fruits and vegetables, livestock, diseases, and miscellaneous. So if you look at that, what was basically native to the Americans as far as the staples was corn, beans, potato, and sweet potato. That means all those were grown in parts of North America, South America, Central America. We also grew, tomatoes, pumpkins, squash, peppers, and pineapple. Turkeys were basically native to the Americas. At the time, there are no known diseases in the Americas. And cocoa, the cocoa bean or cocoa plant was native to the Americas, and also the peanut plant. Those are all things that were growing, or the turkeys were in North and South America. And then on the other side of that column, you have what was grown over in Europe that was brought to the Americas. You have wheat, oats, barley, rice, bananas, grapes, olives. It says citrus, fruits, and apples. They also brought horses, sheep, chickens, cows, and pigs. Most of the livestock that we think of now in America really wasn't native to here. So the chickens, cows, and pigs were all brought from Europe. Diseases were brought here: measles, typhus, smallpox, and then sugar and the coffee bean. was all brought from Europe. So you can see it's kind of two cultures clashing, not clashing, combining. Eventually they clash, but uh, things were native to certain parts of the world. And so we started basically trading back and forth because we had things they needed and we had things that we wanted and needed. Eventually, like, obviously the chickens, cows, and pigs, that's how we sustain ourselves today. But they weren't native to North or South America. They were all brought from Europe. Okay, so that chart is going to be important because there's going to be some questions where you have to go and look at that chart. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip over the next page. And this talks about the English colonies because the United States was settled by English settlers. You also have some French, Dutch, Spanish, but for the colonies, most of the people were English. Okay. And they settled on the East Coast. When we were in class, the first place, was Jamestown in Virginia, and also up in Mass at Plymouth Rock. And that was in the 1600s. And people were fleeing from England because they were being persecuted because if you didn't believe in religion, sometimes you were jailed, you were ostracized, kicked out of society. So a lot of people didn't believe in that particular religion. They wanted to come here and kind of start their own religion, be able to practice whatever they want. Also, too, they came here for economic opportunity. Things weren't great in England. They thought they could go across the ocean and kind of start a new, basically, way of life where that we had all this economic opportunity because it was a brand new country. So you were kind of able to do whatever you wanted. And England was pretty established, so there weren't the same economic opportunities in England that there were in the United States because we were a brand new country. Okay, and here's where the clash starts. So the settlers claimed the land when they came to the colonies is their own. And really the Native Americans, as you saw on the first page, had been there, it said, I think, 30,000 years ago. So obviously they had been living here a long time before the English settlers came. So what the English settlers started doing, they started moving the Indians west. They wanted, the colonies to be their own land. There were some armed conflicts, so the Indians basically started getting pushed west into like what would be today like Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, things like that. Not all of them. There were still obviously New York. The Iroquois still stayed in New York, but they had conflicts. So a lot of the Indians basically were forced to be moving further and further west as the United States got bigger and bigger. Okay. And the colonists basically were aided by England. England gave them money, weapons, because at the time, the colonies were still under control of England. Even though it was the United States, they were considered colonies. So the king still had basically control over the colonies. So they were basically funding the colonies. And that was kind of expensive. So England had to borrow money to help pay for these new colonies that they were developing. And eventually what they started to do, they started to tax the colonies. And we talked in class, like there was a tea tax, stamp tax. And the colonies kind of got fed up with that because they kind of felt like this was their own country and the king was ruling from across the Atlantic Ocean. And, eventually that led us to the Revolutionary War. And it was no taxation without representation. What that means is they really didn't have a say in the government. The king was still telling them how to run the colonies. And basically the new colonies said, I've had enough. We want to be our own country. And that led to the Revolutionary War. In 1776, dates aren't important, but just for context, they came here 1600s, and almost 190 years later, they finally declared their independence from England. The king wasn't happy about that, and that's what led to basically the Revolutionary War in 1781. And George Washington, who was our first president, was the leader of the colonial army, And that's why he later became president, because he did such a good job. He defeated England, and obviously we declared our independence. And basically, we now became the United States of America, and we had our independence from Great Britain. So there are kind of 6 questions that go along with this reading. And number 1, the first settlers in America came from England. The reading talks about people came to the Americas from Spain, France, the Netherlands, but most of the settlers in the colonies were English. They were English colonies. So that's important to know that most of the people in the 13 colonies were all English that came from England. One effect of the Columbia Exchange was a spread of deadly blank among the Native Americans. So if you look at that chart, you're going to see diseases would be kind of the answer. That was deadly. Smallpox, measles, and typhus. Some of the smallpox killed a lot of the Native Americans. And it's similar to what's going on now. If you can think about this with this coronavirus, we don't have an immunity to it. It's kind of a new disease. It's just being introduced in the United States for the first time. So none of us have any antibodies to fight it. And the same thing with the Native Americans, because that disease was never in the Americas. The Europeans brought it. So obviously, if they were never exposed to it, they couldn't build up antibodies. And the diseases brought from Europe killed a lot of the Native Americans. So number 2 would be deadly diseases. Number 3, because of conflicts with the European settlers, Native Americans were forced to move west. And we talked about that a little bit. There was always armed conflicts in the 13 colonies. So the colonists kept moving the Indians further and further west. Okay. Number 4, the colonists protested against British taxes. Okay, like I said, they were English. They loved their tea. And what England did, they put a tax on the tea, which made it really expensive. And the colonists didn't like that. They also basically put a tax on stamps. So every time you mailed a letter or anything, you had to pay money for that. So a lot of the colonists thought these taxes were unfair, and that's really what kind of sparked the revolution, like I mentioned, was kind of the unfair taxing of the colonists. They were kind of like, well, you're 3,000 miles away across the ocean, and you're still trying to rule us. You're making us pay money to help support your government, and they weren't real happy about that. Number 5, the document that proclaimed the colonists' intention to be free that's a Declaration of Independence. So free independence. We're basically saying we want to be our own country, and we're declaring freedom from Great Britain or England. Okay, and that basically, on the second page, it talks about that. That happened in 1776. We were declaring our independence, and 5 years later, the war broke out. Okay, so number 6, it's just going to ask you to look at the chart on the bottom of the first page. It says, describe 2 ways in which the Columbia Exchange changed the life of the Americans. Okay, so you can pick anything from that. A lot of it would be the food. We are now basically, basically we had sheep, we had chickens, we had cows, we had pigs. We also basically got bananas, grapes, olives, citrus, fruits, apples. So all that food that wasn't native to here basically was brought by ships in the trade. So we were exposed to new foods. You can certainly use the example of the diseases. New types of diseases were introduced into the Americas from Europe. So people got sick and died, especially the Native Americans. Those would probably be the 2 biggest things. You would just take something from one column and realize that basically came here from Europe. So basically, you're exposed to mostly different foods. And that basically, today, obviously, growing cattle. There's lots of cattle farms in the United States, lots of pig farms, chickens too. Those are kind of staples of our economy today. And if they were never brought from Europe, we would never be able to obviously, have those. So that's a huge thing. Some of the fruits and vegetables, one one thing I found was kind of interesting is that pineapples were, I think, native to somewhere in South America. I think a lot of people think that they were native to somewhere in Asia, but they're really native to somewhere in South America, which is kind of interesting. So, today, too, apples are abundant in the United States, and that came from Europe too. So apple trees never grew here. You know, George Washington chopping down the apple tree. That probably came over early on. They got some seeds from Europe and started growing apple trees here. So basically, just the exchange of food would, I think, be one of the biggest things you put in that. Also, the disease would be the two main things you could put in that. Other than that, you guys, I'm going to keep putting videos up on social studies about the colonial experience. We're getting up to, we'll talk a little bit about the war. I think some of the videos will start talking about some of the other taxes, and you can understand how the colonists felt about, being taxed from a country that's 3,000 miles away. And they really felt like they had really no say in the government. The king was making all decisions for them. Like, they didn't get to vote, they didn't get to express their opinion. It's part of the reason why eventually the war broke out, because they wanted to break away from the rule of the king and they wanted to set their own rules, things like that. So next time, what I'll do to you guys, and I apologize for the science and social studies we've been doing, just kind of fill in the blank or true or false. And on the actual test, it is multiple choice. But a lot of you took the ORT social studies and did very well on it. So hopefully, we can just do a little more practice, and I'll give you some multiple choice questions, and that way we can talk about, like I mentioned, the science, crossing out answers that aren't right, and it gives you a better chance. So I hope everyone has a good weekend. If you have any questions, email me. All the math is up. So hopefully you get a chance to look at that. And like I said, have a nice weekend, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.